Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osaberg501 and today I want to go over another one of the leaked legendary tier sets for Outriders, and this is the Acari set for the Pyromancer. Now before we get into the video, less than 5% of people that watch my videos are subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with all of my uploads. And like with all of these leaked legendaries for Outriders, we're not going to be paying too much attention to the specific numbers on the armor pieces. We're mainly going to be focused on the tier set bonuses and the mods. And the class specific tier sets in Outriders all focus on two different abilities, whether it be through the tier set bonus or the mods on the armor pieces. And the first ability that this tier set focuses on is Heatwave. Summon a fiery wave that deals damage and inflicts burn to all enemies in its path. And we do have this ability in the demo. It's essentially just a damaging ability that damages everything in a straight line. It is a decently thick straight line, but a pretty basic ability that definitely has a lot of room to be modded. And the second ability is Overheat, deals a little damage to all enemies in a large radius and interrupts their skills. Enemies afflicted by burn receive additional damage and the burn will be consumed. And we also have this in the demo, and this is essentially a massive AoE ability. It hits enemies pretty much in the entirety of the play area you're in. I think pretty much every play area where you could see an enemy in the demo, this ability can hit, and it doesn't do a ton of damage baseline unless enemies have burn on them, but there are tons of mods that affect how this ability works, and I definitely think this is going to be an ability that is in a lot of builds just because of how massive the radius is on this. And the tier set bonus for the Acari set is every enemy damaged by Heatwave grants 25 anomaly power bonus for 10 seconds. Now, since this tier set bonus doesn't have a stack amount, I'm assuming it works how a few of the other mods in the game work, in that it essentially still stacks the anomaly power bonus, but it doesn't refresh the timer. So say if you hit 5 enemies, it would then give you 5 stacks of this 25% anomaly power increase, but all 5 of these stacks would go away after 10 seconds, no matter what. Say if you have a mod that lets you have 2 charges of Heatwave, and then you hit 5 enemies in the first and 5 enemies in the second right after each other, the first 5 stacks of this anomaly power bonus will all be gone after the 10 seconds, even if you hit another Heatwave on enemies. It doesn't refresh the duration on all of the stacks. But even with that being said, this is still massive, because if you say hit a heat wave on 5 enemies, that is a massive amount of anomaly power increase, and then you could do 2 other abilities or more depending on if you have mods to allow you to use abilities twice. You could then have massive burst windows, and these last for 10 seconds, so you could have this buff up 100% of the time, or at least a certain amount of stacks of this buff up 100% of the time. Overall, it's a really strong tier set bonus. So first off, we have Helmets of the Acari, and the tier 3 for this is Fire Tsunami for Heatwave. Increases the width of the firewall. Now it's not very specific. We don't know how much bigger the firewall is going to be, but just by using this ability and seeing how thick it is normally, and it is a tier 3 mod, I'm assuming this is going to be a pretty massive increase to the actual width of this ability. And since his ability applies burn to all enemies, this helps a lot with synergizing with other abilities and synergizing with the basic healing of the Pyromancer. And the other mod is Ember Shield for Overheat. Each status consumed by the skill increases your resistances by 10% for 10 seconds. Stacks up to 5 times. So depending on how much cooldown reduction you have and how often you're applying burn to enemies and how effectively you're applying burn to different enemies, you could possibly have this buff up for 100% of the time. If you get a 50% resistance increase, which is the max for this mod, that is a pretty massive damage reduction. And like I said, depending on how much cooldown reduction you get and how quickly you can reapply burn to different enemies to proc this mod, this could be a really good increase to consistent tankiness. And next up, we have Armor of the Acari, and the tier 3 mod for this is Detonator for Overheat. Decreases the skill's cooldown by 50%. And like what we just went over with the tier 1 mod from the helmet, having a reduced cooldown on Overheat now synergizes super well with that other mod, because now there's a possibility that you could have that other mod up for 100% of the time, which adds a massive amount of synergy. Then the other mod is Tidal Wave for Heatwave. The skill can be activated one more time before triggering the cooldown. And like I've said, with this mod for a ton of other abilities, I'm not the biggest fan of the way Outriders deals with this kind of modification of abilities, because even though you can use the ability twice before triggering the cooldown, I think it has a really big downside that you have to use both of these skill activations to start the refresh of the cooldown. In a lot of RPGs, it goes on a charge system, so you would have 2 charges. You could use one, and that charge you just used would instantly start to refresh, and then you would have the other to use when you need it. Instead, with these mods, it feels more like you just spam out the ability twice instead of keeping one for a more strategic situation. Next, we have Gauntlets of the Acari, and the tier 3 for this is Strength from Fire for Heatwave. Using this skill grants 10 seconds of 15% weapon damage bonus for each affected enemy. So this actually synergizes pretty well with the tier set bonus of this set. Essentially, the more enemies you hit, the more weapon damage bonus you get. And this could be pretty decent with a build that is kind of more of a hybrid with anomaly power and weapon damage, but I'm not sure how powerful that would be. But using this specific mod on a different set is probably going to be incredibly strong. Having a different set that your abilities are more utility to buff up your weapon and your weapon damage, this could be an incredibly strong mod for something like that. Then the other mod is Blacksmith for Overheat. Each status condition consumed by the skill grants 18,000 armor bonus for 8 seconds. So this could be pretty massive for your survivability, especially with mixing it with some of the other mods we went over for Overheat, like the reduced cooldown. Depending on how quickly you can apply burn to a ton of different enemies and then hit them all with Overheat, which consumes all the burn, this could be a massive amount of armor. But you are going to need some decent cooldown reduction and a bunch of other mods for this to synergize to allow this to stack up enough to be worth it. Next up, we have Waistcloth of the Acari, and the tier 3 for this is Anomaly Echo. Grants 113,000 firepower and 94,000 anomaly power bonus on skill activation for 15 seconds. Now, we have seen this on another one of the legendary armor pieces, and this is incredibly strong. And comparing these numbers to officially released armor pieces from the developers, this firepower and anomaly power bonus is pretty massive, and it lasts for 15 seconds, so you shouldn't have any difficulty keeping this up 100% of the time. So it seems like this is a mod that, even though it's really basic, is incredibly strong in the amount of additional power it consistently gives you. And the other mod is Irradiation Wave for Heatwave. Inflicts weakness on enemies affected by this skill, and weakness makes enemies deal 30% less damage. So this can be decent because of that damage reduction, but I do think if you don't have a ton of other mods for Heatwave, this probably isn't going to be that worth. And then finally, we have a Boots of the Acari, and the tier 3 for this is Master Consumer for Overheat. The skill consumes either fire or ash status to deal damage. Consuming both at once increases damage by 150%. This mod actually adds a lot of gameplay around it, because not only does it give you the chance to use ash and burn in a build, but the skill activates as it normally would off either of the status effects. So it would deal good damage off just consuming one of those, but then it also does a massive amount of damage increase when doing it off both. So this heavily incentivizes you to use both those status effects and apply both of them to as many enemies as you can to pop this big overheat and deal a massive amount of AoE damage to everything. And like we talked about with Overheat, it has a massive radius. So I could see this being combined with a weapon that has the tier 3 effects to apply burn and ash to enemies, and just hitting everything with those status effects and then hitting a massive overheat for just massive AoE damage. And the other mod is Hellfire for Heatwave. If the skill damages 3 enemies, all subsequent enemies will receive an additional 30,000 damage. And this does seem pretty strong because the damage increase is decent And with the density of enemies in Outriders, this probably wouldn't be too hard to proc a lot of the time. And specifically having this with the mod that increases the width of Heatwave, this could just be a pretty decent increase to the amount of damage this is dealing. So that is the entirety of the Acari class set for the Pyromancer. It seems to be a pretty strong set, especially if you're going with more of a anomaly power focused build. This does seem like a set that is going to be stronger once you get more towards a high end. It seems like it's going to require a good amount of synergy, a good amount of cooldown reduction, and some specific mods to really get the most out of it. So subscribe if you want to see more Outriders or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video, leave a comment down below what you guys think about this build, and thanks for watching.